why did we decide to write this book? There is endless coverage of Facebook. There's such a saturation of Facebook news. I'll start in 2018, November, and a story that we wrote, an investigation for the New York Times, Shira and myself, and some other colleagues, called Delay, Deny, and Deflect. And I don't know if anybody here in the room read that story, but it was an investigation into what actually was happening within the company that led to Russian interference on the website ahead of the 2016 election, as well as the data privacy abuses related to Cambridge Analytica. What were the leaders thinking? What was the decision-making process? And what we found there was a pattern, and it's the pattern that was just read on the back of the book. It was a pattern at the company of a big problem or scandal emerging, executives apologizing to the public and promising to do better, sometimes saying, really, the problem is not as bad as you think, and look at YouTube and look at TikTok and look at these other companies that are just as bad. But that pattern repeating itself. Then another big problem, big scandal emerging, more apologies, and sort of wash, rinse, and repeat. So Sheryl and I wanted to understand what is behind this pattern. There has to be something that explains why this is happening. It can't just be one slip-up after another. It's just too endemic to what's happening. So what are some of the things that we found in our book? We found that this headlong pursuit of growth and attention, because remember, Mark Zuckerberg, he's not only created this great technology, he's an incredibly competitive person. He fancies himself in the likeness of Caesar Augustus. Caesar Augustus is his hero. Mark Zuckerberg has said, and I paraphrase, look, Caesar Augustus, through some pretty harsh means, did establish a big period of peace and did establish an empire. And he's people remember him. He had great impact. Mark Zuckerberg definitely sees Facebook as something with historical impact. And Mark Zuckerberg said, it's better to be understood than to be liked. So he understands that all the criticism that Facebook is undergoing right now is just part and parcel to this calculus that I read in the very beginning in the ugly memo, that they will be criticized and bad things will happen, but in the end, it will be so historically important what he's creating that he's willing to absorb those costs. So these are what we found, all tied to the Facebook story, the pattern. And we found in our reporting that you can't really understand, and this goes back to why we wrote the book, you can't really understand the Facebook story without going back to this marriage that we talked about in the beginning, of the technology and understanding the power of attention and engagement mixed with this incredibly powerful, perfect, beautiful, potentially dangerous business model that feeds off of that attention and makes, by our account, very many billions of dollars just on Monday in the last quarter. Thank you.
The book isn't very uplifting by itself either, is it?
We wanted this to be an educational book. We wanted people to understand why we are where we are today. And unless you understand the systems in place and the frames that explain why we are here today, it's hard to make informed decisions, not only as regulators, as businesses that rely on Facebook, either as advertisers or in other ways, and as consumers, because everybody has agency. So we think it's an incredibly serious topic, and not to be hyperbolic, but we think in many ways it's the story of our time.
Yeah. A lot of people surrounding Facebook always thought there's Sheryl Sandberg. She's the decent, experienced executive and might be sort of the moral conscience of the company. How would you describe her?
So Sheryl Sandberg is incredibly sophisticated and polished as a public figure. I think that maybe many people here know that she used to be the chief of staff to former Treasury Secretary Lawrence Summers. She worked at the World Bank, so she has a history in politics in Washington. She knows very well. She was in charge of the Washington operation. And she is a very savvy business person. She successfully built AdWords and AdSense, the Google advertising business, from something very small into a multi-billion dollar business.
And she's very good at public relations.
Very good at public relations. She was not all that in tune with regulators in Washington. Not in tune, and also there was a lot of confidence in Facebook's power going into meetings with regulators. And I'll give an example. Sheryl Sandberg goes to the FTC, back to that story, and she essentially says, like, look, we have the best privacy policy of any technology company because we provide so many options for how you can control your privacy settings. And Jonathan Leibowitz said, even my teenage daughters are having trouble with these privacy settings. They accidentally are making their profiles much more public. This is a real problem, right? And Sheryl Sandberg's response, which I think was really amazing, and I think it's telling about how they view Washington and the amount of arguably hubris they have going into Washington, is that she said, oh, you know, that's so great that your teenagers are on Facebook, because Facebook is so great for empowering youth. It's just a great place for young people to express themselves. And Jonathan Leibowitz said, you don't get me. I'm saying I am really worried about my kids that are on Facebook.
And the image arising from the book is that the adult has not left the room, but at least has been sidetracked quite significantly since, right?
Yeah. So their relationship has been tested a lot. Going back to the fact that Sheryl Sandberg was assigned so many more responsibilities under Mark Zuckerberg, he blamed her for the PR fallout for Cambridge Analytica, as well as the Russian election interference. And what Shira and I found really fascinating about that, and even employees would say that themselves, is that that's vastly unfair in many ways, because yes, the PR fallout was bad and she should take responsibility for that, but those problems actually stem from his side of the business. They were product mistakes that resulted in hundreds and thousands of websites getting data. She has said numerous times, there's ultimately one person's decision that matters, and that's Mark Zuckerberg. And there's just so much that I can do to push back. And then she chooses the fights to fight. She chose to fight against, for example, the Mark Zuckerberg's greenlighting of Holocaust denial on the website, essentially anti-Semitism. But that was the one thing, and personally it matters a lot to her. So she did fight about that, but she knows that there's just so much she can do to push back.
Outrage creates attention, and attention creates money for Facebook, right? So if you agitate your public enough, then you will draw people back, you will draw their eyeballs back to their screens.
Yeah, I mean, from our conversations with people, I think both can be true. It can be ideological. He truly believes he has a very specific worldview on expression, maximal expression view, but also the business of Facebook is to get you, I mean, I explain in many different ways what the business is, but also another way to think about Facebook's business is it's about agitation, because agitation gets you to come back, and it gets you to like and share and comment and join groups. And it can be positive agitation or negative agitation, but that is the business model. And political speech is very agitating, you know? And what Facebook does not want to do, absolutely as a business, is they never not want to be the center of conversation. They always want to be the center of conversation. They don't want Trump, Biden, whoever, to take their conversation elsewhere. They want to keep it on Facebook. So it was a very, very hard decision. For a business, and their motivations are business, but they also are ideological.
Yeah.
Because he truly believes you don't want to be painted into a corner where you make one decision on a political leader and then you have to make that decision for everybody.
Yeah, it's quite a troubling image that you lay out, because we all see how powerful one individual is, but over the course of the years he became more powerful, and he seems to have ambition for more power. It seems quite explicitly so that he aspires to more power, right? Or
yeah, I think Mark Zuckerberg wants every individual in the world who has an internet connection to be on Facebook. He wants to create something that he believes, and even some of his greatest critics, like Chris Hughes. I talked to Chris Hughes at length, one of the co-founders, and he's like, Mark really believes it. He really believes that connecting the world will be a good thing. I think both can be true, though. You can believe it can be a good thing, and you can believe it's business. There's a massive business incentive in doing that, and you can also believe that it's great in terms of historical impact. Like, all of these things can be true. But he does believe that in the end, he'll be judged well for this reason. So yeah.
And this shows that it's intentional. There's a level of amoral behavior that can manifest in big companies. ethics simply don't play a role.
Yeah.
But in these instances, people seem to have taken deliberate actions to make the news feed an unsafer place in return for more money.
Well, one thing to understand about Facebook is it is very metrics driven, in the sense that if you are a product engineer, you want to be able to show how your product feeds to the ultimate goal of more engagement and growth for Facebook, and you're rewarded for that. What doesn't get rewarded is, again, like I said before, saying we need to hire 20 more people on the integrity team to slow it all down, you know? So I think that there's something cultural. And I say all of this not to duck your question, but it's hard to ascribe motives, because I do believe that they understand that there are grave problems. They believe that the problems being described are exaggerated. The top leaders do. Many employees do not believe it. They believe absolutely what's being reported by us in our book, The Whistleblower, is an absolute factual representation of what's happening.
Yeah.
But the top leaders believe that, that they're trying, but it's hard to balance everything. That's kind of what Andrew Bosworth was getting at in his memo, The Ugly, that's the calculus. There will be some collateral damage, but in the end, we believe that what we're doing is right.
You laid out how you think that this might be the story of our time.
Yeah.
But could you maybe sketch, because this seems to be a historic moment, and we have had moments like this in history with monopolies and robber barons in the 19th century. Do you think it's somehow comparable, and that it will somehow also end in the same way, namely by breaking up monopolies and states becoming stronger and more intervening in markets?
So if history is a guide, it's inevitable that there's going to be some sort of restraint or regulation on Facebook and other social media companies and the internet sector at large. This was the case with every single major communications platform has been regulated, from the telephone, radio, cable TV, broadcast TV, internet. It's all like internet service providers. They all become regulated at some point because simply they're utilities, right? And there's a belief in the United States as well as in Europe that there's a public duty to regulate these utilities, essentially. So that feels inevitable. So it feels like that could be the moment, but it is not going to, this is Taco's question, it's not going to happen in a year. This is going to be years in the making. And meanwhile, there is absolutely the potential for any regulations in the short time to only make Facebook more powerful, because Facebook can withstand a lot of regulation at this point.
Yeah.
They are so powerful. And a lot of smaller companies can get caught up in it. So it's a really tricky thing, for regulators.
I would say we give Cecilia a big hand of applause. Thank you so much.
Thank you so